But let's get into the show this evening with inviting back to the show someone we haven't seen for a wee while from the New Zealand Herald, Mr. Simon Wilson. Simon, kia ora, good evening to you, sir.
Kia ora, Pat.
Lovely to have you back. It's been a while. I think it might have been October last
year.
year.
It's very nice to be here. Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah. You have written a very interesting op-ed. I don't want to sound dismissive, but do you think it's kind of a heading that kind of wrote itself after watching the performance of Mr. Luxon on some levels?
There was a point where that headline was in my head, and I thought, that's it. I can't even remember if it was in the shower, if I woke up thinking it or whatever, but yeah, I suddenly realized this is the topic I was going to write about, and that was the way to express it. And yeah.
So let's talk, shall we? Christopher Luxon's long, slow walk to oblivion. Talk to us about your rationale for what you're seeing in Mr. Luxon now and this slow hikoi that he is on.
Yeah, so I guess the short takeout of it is the government last year had everything going its way. They had won a big majority in the election. The Labour Party had responded by going, well, we've really got to do a year of penance and keep our heads down, and we're just going to, keep everything clean and nice and not pretend like we think people think we could be a government just yet. We've got to just sit it out for a bit. So they didn't really have an effective Labour opposition. The Greens had an annus horribilis. They had a terrible year with some of the things that happened to them were, you could argue, self-inflicted, but many of the things weren't. Professor Collins's death. I don't think people saw the extent to which MPs and ex-MPs would really go at them. But they survived all that. And at the end of the year and going into this year, Labour hasn't fallen in the polls. The Greens haven't fallen in the polls, and nor have Te Pāti Māori. They've all hung in there. National ought to be at least 10 points ahead. National ought to be romping along at the moment. They've had it all their way. They've had a Prime Minister dominating with his rhetoric, and yet it appears to have made absolutely no difference. They sunk then, and now they're starting to sink. And that's what was the backstory, if you like, to my thinking. Well, Luxon had the easiest year he could possibly have had, and yet he didn't manage to make any kind of difference at all. And now surely he's going to be in trouble.
So what I hear you saying is they basically had the perfect storm to be riding high, and they still can't do it. Do you think it's because of Luxon's lacking in ability, or is it a bigger picture to do with the public seeing like what's going on with the Treaty Principle Bill and not liking the whole picture?
There are a bunch of factors that are not Luxon's fault, and some of them are Trumpian and other factors to do with what's happening in the world. And there is also the really big issue that, my perception is that everybody's angry now. There's a whole lot of anger about all sorts of things. And I said in my column, you see it in driver behavior, you see it in domestic violence statistics, you see it in the way in which bus drivers and supermarket workers are being attacked. Right across society, people are quicker to anger, and of course you see it on social media. And because of that, it is harder to be a government than it used to be. People want to blame someone, and it's not even clear always what they want to blame someone for, but they want to blame someone, and so they're blaming the government. So it's not going to surprise me if we see a one-term government this time, but also it wouldn't surprise me at all to see a one-term government next time and the time after that as well, because people aren't going to stop being angry anytime soon, as far as I can see.
We were talking about in the last few weeks that Luxon seems to be losing it from both ends. There's people in the middle that, that would be mythical swing voter who might be going, we didn't vote for all this crap. And then there's people on the further right who are more like, we want more Trumpian type stuff, and they're going away as well. It's interesting you'd say the thing about a one-term government. We had Chewie on last year and we talked about that. And he said actually under first past the post, if you had a look at those results, there could have been several one-term governments, through the 70s and 80s that we didn't see because of first past the post.
Yeah.
It would be fascinating though to see what would have happened and what will happen this time, because that they haven't really. It's not like the votes have gone from national elsewhere and all of a sudden the right bloc has picked up. It has just stayed stagnant, which is certainly not what you want in that honeymoon period of the first 18 months of term one, is it?
I think there's a number of things that you can see from the polls. One of them is that New Zealand First and ACT, particularly ACT, have gone all in on the things that they think will grow their bases, and it isn't working. They're not in any significant way stronger than they were when at election time last year. So David Seymour and his Treaty Principles Bill, Shane Jones and his rampant drill baby drill and demonisation of the Greens and so on, it's not really moving the dial for them. One of the extraordinary things about the response to my column this week is that from the left, from way out on the far left to way out on the far right, and pretty much everybody in between, people have gone, yeah, you're right, Luxon's not doing the business. And, all those people don't all agree with me or don't agree with each other about why he's not doing the business or how he's not, but they do agree that he's not. Yeah.
I've seen a couple of pretty awful people retweeting your article going, I agree with you, Simon Wilson. I'm just like, how does that feel, having some of those more despicable people in society going, is it the case that for them sometimes a broken clock is right twice, or they're just reading their own thing into it? They know they're not happy, maybe not for the reasons you're saying, but as long as you say you're not happy, there's some kind of agreement. There's
absolutely been that. I've had people saying, honestly, Simon, I don't agree with you at all or hardly ever, but I really do this time. And then as they go on, you go, oh, you don't agree with me at all. All you think is that Luxon should go, but you think that because you think he's in the pocket of demonic international forces that are going to destroy Western civilization. And that's not really what I think. So, there is that. But from a purely political point of view, if you've got a prime minister who is struggling to find a popular base anywhere across the spectrum, you'd have to think that's a worry for the National Party.
Yeah, for sure. Chewie, you got anything you want to jump in with, mate?
I've got the sneezes, so we'll see if we can get this going. As far as those people that reach out and sort of say, hey, look, I don't agree with you either, Simon, but you're right on this one thing. Is there something that unites that group of people that you could sort of put a finger on and go, it's that? Or is it just a grab bag of different pocket issues that they're not happy with them over?
One of the things that I like to think is true about politics, I don't know if it is, but I'd like to think it, is that whether or not you agree with a particular politician's politics, if they're effective and likable and you feel like you can trust them to be saying true things, you're more likely to recognize that they're legitimate as a political leader. And Luxon hasn't managed to do that. People don't, I think, believe him when he talks because he doesn't talk in human connecting ways. And it is very hard to see that he is doing things that are making the kind of difference that he's talking about. And one of the things that's really, I would have thought, a crisis for the National Party right now in relation to Luxon is that it's easy for them to get obsessed about, oh my God, Seymour's hoovering up the right, or Shane Jones is hoovering up all the right as well. That shouldn't be their worry. What they should be worried about is that they've got a political leader who allowed the Treaty Principles Bill to put racism in the middle of our political conversation. People in the middle of New Zealand politics who might vote left or right don't want that. That's absolutely not where people are. And Luxon profoundly misread that, and he's reaping the rewards of that now. And I think you can see that in other ways. People don't want, you could make an argument that people in the middle, centre, right maybe aren't convinced that it's a real priority to solve poverty, but they don't want poverty to get worse, at least. They don't really like the beneficiary bashing. They don't really like the idea that actually the minimum wage is falling behind inflation, rents are falling behind inflation. That isn't the kind of society that they're looking for. Climate change is another excellent example of it. They don't want a government that finds it too hard to acknowledge that it's a problem that needs to be addressed properly.
Seymour revealed, I think in a Q&A program, that the Treaty Principles Bill wasn't a bottom line for him. Now, that's says one of two things. It either says that Luxon can't negotiate, or that's Seymour saying it was a bottom line, but I want to undermine Luxon. So neither of those two things are particularly good. Yeah. And we've got Chewie's 6 favourite words are he's not very good at this. That's Chewie's 6 favourite words, and part of your article speaks to that. Just thinking about coalitions of the past, Luxon's inability to control his coalition partners is not normal. Dame Jacinda Ardern's first government included Greens and New Zealand First, who hated each other, but she did not allow that to undermine the coherence of the government as a whole. Sir John Key did the same with ACT and the Māori Party when he was in power. Ardern and Key knew how to manage Seymour and Peters. Luxon doesn't seem to have a clue.
Well, I think that's, I wrote that and I stand by that. It is astonishing to me that over the last year, as it has become clear that Seymour and Peters have both decided to kind of play whoopsie on Luxon's ass, he hasn't known how to deal with that. He just does not know, and he still doesn't know. I was going to say, I assume he thinks that actually it doesn't matter to voters, and we'll all look past that. But I don't think that's true. He looks like an idiot now.
I was just wondering then whether he doesn't see them as an antagonistic force. Like he obviously sees Labour and the Greens as being the left. They're the opposition. They're the guys that have got to follow on. And these two at my sides, they're on my team. So I don't need to. But they're not. They're not on his team. No. They're on their own teams. So
they're on their own teams.
The door open.
I think you're right. They're on their own teams, and they're trying to steal his voters. They're not on his team. They are trying to steal his voters. And to me, one of the really big issues for Luxon ought to be right now that there's an organisation in New Zealand politics that has split the National Party, and it's the ACT Party that's done that, and they've done that with their Treaty Principles Bill. There are a whole lot of National Party members and supporters who are saying, why aren't you supporting the bill? And there's a whole lot of others saying, how dare you support the bill? We've got to move on from this. Whether or not Luxon thinks he should support it or shouldn't support it, he will know that split is incredibly damaging to him. He doesn't need it. And that's my reading of why he didn't go to Waitangi. He didn't want to stand next to Seymour and be associated with it, because if he had, people would have gone, you, Seymour, you introduced the bill, you, Luxon, you enabled him to do that. And he doesn't want that conversation. He wants this whole issue to disappear so he can rebuild his party and make it united again. And he's played this one so badly.
Yeah. And our audience is sick of hearing this, but remember, it's not just him that didn't go to Waitangi. It's Nicola Willis didn't go, Chris Bishop didn't go, Simeon Brown didn't go. Number 5, Erica Stanford, number 5, was the person that they sent there. So what does that say to the voting base about what the National Party thinks of relationship with Māori and our National Day? The other thing has just jumped out of my head, so I'll leave it at that for now about that. So it's a complete disrespect from the whole National Party about that.
There was an interesting dynamic from National at Waitangi. I was there. Erica Stanford, you're right. She was the ranking minister, but she didn't front anything. It was
Number
fronted
5.
by Tama Potaka and by Paul Goldsmith. And during the period when the Te Pāti Māori announced that they wanted to have a commissioner, a Waitangi commissioner. It was presented by a whole lot of people as if that was a veto over Parliament, that they would be able to overrule Parliament, which is not what Te Pāti Māori said. But the National Party response to it was fronted by Tama Pōtaka, who said, this is an interesting idea, we will look at it. And Paul Goldsmith, standing next to him as Minister of Justice, started to complain about the idea, and Pōtaka shut him down. Pōtaka said, no, it is an interesting idea, we will look at it. Which showed a level of statesmanship, but also showed a level of, okay, just right now, I'm the guy with the big pants on and I'm doing the talking, which is pretty interesting.
It's interesting to watch Tama Pōtaka. Sometimes you have to wonder, and we do at least anyway, how the heck does he navigate this? Because he's very well respected amongst Māori to do with, his tikanga, his whakapapa, his language. Like he knows it all, and then he's working with people that say we got to make sure Māori is considered a second language and English. I don't know how he squares that circle.
The way I read it, I knew him before he went into politics. He's a conservative right-wing politician. He believes in the right-wing principles of small government, individual responsibility, particularly that one. And so that's why he's national. But at the same time, he is a highly respected iwi business leader with real experience in that field, and that's a very rare thing in any party in Parliament. I think he's the only one at the moment. He has that. And he represents something that I think is pretty important in New Zealand society and in New Zealand politics. If you want to argue that Māori politics and Māori perspectives is not just a left-wing thing, but actually is everywhere, then you've got to allow that there are right-wing Māori leaders, and that's a good thing. He is one of them, and he stands for, we can be right-wing, we can stand for the things we think are important without being racist. And by rejecting racists, we can still be. And that's what he stands for. He is up against it. You've got to say he's up against it.
Not so much as government standing for that at the moment, the whole lot of them.
No,
just a couple of quick things. Two more bits I want to read from your article as well, because one of them, once again, I think you might have been listening to Chewie a bit too much, Simon, because you're echoing him a couple of times in here. You talk about Luxon's leadership, and you basically say, you literally say, we're a country with a leader who has shown he can't manage effectively in these relatively calm times. Pray we don't find out what he's like in a real crisis, because the signs are not good. And the second thing, Chewie, and you can speak to this because this is what you say all the time, what Luxon's actions tell these voters is he does not understand this country we live in. And that's your point, Chewie, because you always talk about most of his adult life being outside of New Zealand. Chewie.
Yeah, his interactions with what New Zealand is about is extremely limited. His kids didn't go to school here. He hasn't had to use healthcare here. Like all of this sort of stuff has insulated him. So when he goes, I understand that Kiwis are doing it tough. No, my dude, you don't. You never have. You're insulated from all of this, and I think that makes him unrelatable to most people. The way that he speaks just reinforces that, and it just comes across extremely disingenuous.
Agree with you. One of the things that you kind of hope that all politicians will do is have an ability to filter the noise from the substance. And there's a lot of shouty people who go outrageous, Māori getting too much, etc., etc., etc. A good politician can see through that and recognise that it is coming from an extreme. But if you're not grounded in the society, it's harder. If your kids didn't go to school here, you don't know the way in which kids in the New Zealand education system are comfortable living in a bicultural society. You don't know that. So it's harder for you. And Luxon shows all the traits of someone who just doesn't grasp those things.
It's even more than that, though. It's not that we're comfortable with it. It's actually we love it.
We like
the
it.
Multicultural aspect.
We really do.
It's actually part of who we are. I mean, living down here in Little Norway, aka Dunedin, as I took my road trip north to Waitangi for Waitangi, when I got to Rotorua, I was like,
Yeah.
look at these brown faces. It feels like home again, because I grew up in West Auckland, and it's not actually that we're comfortable, is that most of us fucking love it. It is part of the New Zealand story. It's who we are.
That's it. Yep.
Okay, couple of things. What's next for National? You've put your column out there, and included in this, if anyone wants to, it's in the ballot, wants to have are these guys going to last the full term? Is there going to be an early election? What's the election date? I mean, Winston Peters has never seen a full term in coalition. We know that. But what's next for National under this kind of weak leadership, this kind of walk into oblivion? How would you word it? Walking into...
long, slow walk to oblivion.
Long, slow walk to oblivion. What's next? 18 months till the election.
Yeah, Winston Peters did last a full term with the first Jacinda Ardern government.
Did he go outside of cabinet, though, for the last bit?
Well, he didn't bring the government down, let's put it that way.
I stand corrected.
Anyway, I don't... Who knows? I don't think we'll have an early election. I think probably everyone in politics thinks that's too risky to do. But it's really clear that Peters and Seymour are both far more interested in building their own bases than they are in constructively running the country, something I said in my column. As I said, it isn't really working for them. There's a lot of noise, but they're not building those. Their votes are not going up and up and up, as you might expect from the way they keep on at it. They really aren't. It's a great thing about this country. Their votes, the way they're going about it is not working for them. But I don't know that there's any reason to think they'll stop, because they appear to be completely wedded to it. That's going to make it harder and harder for Luxon. At some point, National are either going to decide, well, we're just stuck with them, or they're going to say, okay, let's have a new leader and do a reset and try and be fresh about this. If the polls show a decline, if the polls show a 5-point or more gap between the centre left and the centre right, National will not sit back and wear it. They will do something about it. And the thing they have to do is, what they'll do is replace their leader. They're not going to go into the election trailing badly in the polls. That's not a thing.
Someone said the other day that Judith Collins was at about 22% when she was rolled. Luxon's at 22%. We've also got people here saying, Peter says, I think Luxon will be rolled after the budget. I've already put my 2 cents out there. I reckon Erica Stanford's the next one, personally. So I think she's the next leader. And I know there's probably others ahead of her in a lot of people's eyes, but I think she'll be the one that is most likely to continue on with a win. That's what I think, at least, anyway, whenever that happens.
I'm with you on that, Pat, actually. Erica Stanford has an unusual mix. She looks fresh and new. She's clearly very smart. She's doing the business and education. From a conservative point of view, she is ticking a whole lot of boxes in terms of her policy reforms. She's one of their ministers who's done her homework and is introducing evidence-based reforms that I know are controversial, but she's not plucking them out of thin air.
She can point to something. She can point to someone. And she's not like, the more you hear... I'm nearly going to say no disrespect intended, but what I'm about to say is very disrespectful, so we'll just forget that. When you look at Nicola Willis's performance, she seems more and more out of her depth, saying sillier and sillier and sillier things. So she's lost, I reckon, a lot of that possibility of being the next number one. And then you've got Simeon and you've got Chris Bishop. There's the tobacco lobbyist situation. There's Simeon and his pretty extreme. In fact, you were talking about those guys being like the ideologues in the National Party now, and so the ideologue is harder to be the likable chap you'd have a beer with, like Key managed to do somehow. So I'm just putting my oar in the stand and saying, I reckon it could be Erica next.
I think one of the Pat's gone, Pat's back. I think one of the things that ironically has happened with Nicola Willis is she always looked like she might be an alternative leader to Luxon. And the National Party conferences I've been to, she's been popular. She's done a very good job as the warm-up act for him. Been impressive. But she's kind of been dragged down with him now too. I think she's kind of part of the this leadership's not working thing. Without ever having really had the chance to show whether she could be something more.
Chewie, do you want to jump in with anything else before we wrap up, other than what you're about to say about me to mock me? But you can do that if you want. I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, just circling back to Pat's crush. Erica Stanford's also pulled off something that is kind of amazing to me, considering the term that National has had. She has managed to insulate herself from the worst blowback.
Yeah.
Like, she has, whether I agree with her or I don't agree with her. Her education reforms seem dreadful. But I think you're acknowledging the fact that they make sense from an ideological point of view. She's kind of backed them, and she stayed in her lane. She hasn't let all of this other bullshit that's happening, even to the point of going, I will not be drawn on David Seymour's lunch. Now, that's our only criticism that we really strongly have of her.
Even though she's in charge of it.
Education minister.
Ultimately.
She's in charge of the whole bag. She's just like, that's little Seymour's pet project, not touching that. That's smart politics.
Yeah.
Remarkable political skills. And remember, she's also Minister of Immigration, which is a portfolio that brings down a lot of politicians. She's managed to not let that bring her down either.
Yeah. Well, we shall say, hey, Simon, it's lovely to see you again. We'll have to have you on more regularly. Thank you for joining us tonight. Anything you want to leave the punters with before we head off?
Look, this is going to be an extraordinary year, because all of the parties of Parliament are really going to go hard now. They all think we've got a chance, or in the case of National, bloody hell, we've got it wrong, we've got to fix this. And so nobody's coasting. Everybody's going to be absolutely front-footing it. And if you're a political junkie, that's pretty exciting.
It does feel like next year's election could be somewhat won this year, depending where people end up at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So, all right, Simon. Thank you so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure, never a chore, and we'll have you on again super soon.
Thank you, mate.
All right,
Bye, Chewie.
Thanks, Simon.